All right. Hey, again, Happy New Year, and so glad you're here. We're actually going to be starting a new sermon series this month called All In. Can I hear say All In? Now, what we're going to be talking about, and if you're new to church or if maybe you made a New Year's resolution, I need to really kind of get into this religious thing a little bit more. It's a great Sunday to be here as well as a great few weeks to be here because we're going to be talking about what is the central thing about what does it mean to have faith and to walk into faith. And this theme of all in is really a theme that we're going to be coming back to again and again. And today's sermon topic is all or nothing. Can I hear say all or nothing? And what we're going to be exploring is this idea about how faith is really an all or nothing proposition and something that we're going to be talking about. And we actually saw in the story that was read earlier from Sheena, it's actually a story that appears to us in Jesus' interaction with a man that happens in the gospel accounts. Now, the gospel accounts are basically historical accounts of the person of Jesus. And Jesus has this interaction with someone that is called the rich young ruler. Now, if you notice in the passage that we actually looked at or heard from Sheena earlier, a rich young ruler, it's actually, this man is described as being someone who had great wealth. This is in the Gospel of Mark. Now, he's also described as someone who's young. He's described that way in the Gospel of Matthew. So again, these historical accounts, these were moments where Jesus is basically interacting with someone who's a rich, young, and then this word ruler is actually used to describe this man in the Gospel of Luke. So all of these different stories are recounting this historical incident where Jesus interacts with a man who's known as a rich, young ruler. Now, if you've been with us over the last year or so, you've probably heard me talk about this several times about how in Scripture, a lot of the people that were so close to God, that God was coming to, whether it's the people of Israel who were in Exodus, or even Jesus himself, who we believe is God himself, was born in a manger. For many of us, I've talked about time and time again, the people that God speaks to and that he's close to are people who are on the margins. People who are actually being oppressed in some way. And so whether it's the people of Israel or whether it's Jesus or whether it's other folks that we talk about where God is close to the brokenhearted, he's close to the poor and the needy. And what I've said to us time and time again, especially for us in this crowd, in this moment, in this city, we live arguably in the wealthiest city in the entire world. And I've said this before to people, like, if you can imagine, like New York City, if you can think about it, the most influential city in the world, where is it? And of course, all of us in New York, we're like, it's New York City. And of course, the epicenter of New York City, where is it? It's Queens. No, I'm just kidding. It's Manhattan, right? It is Manhattan. And where is the center of Manhattan? It's Midtown Manhattan. And so oftentimes what I'll say to different friends, especially friends who don't live here, we are in the epicenter of the entire universe. You know, like there's this way of just kind of this grandiosity that builds. And in some ways it's being somewhat facetious when I talk about this, but it's also kind of true. Like New York City is the center of the world in many ways, and perhaps the most influential center of the world, perhaps the most lucrative part of the world. It costs the most for a bagel right here in Midtown Manhattan, which some of us are obviously not too happy about. But nonetheless, I mean, that's kind of the situation that we find ourselves in. And if that's the case, that this church and where we're located in, if this city, we're kind of at the center of wealth, of influence, of culture, then here's what that means then. That you and I, by virtue of being part of this church and being here and probably living around this area, we're probably like, it's hard for us to relate to the oppressed and the marginalized around the world. But instead, we probably, much like the rich young ruler, we probably have a lot in common with the rich young ruler. It's kind of like, finally, there's someone that Drew is talking about that somehow I can relate to. Now, this is not to dismiss somehow. Like some of us are like, hey man, I just started out, I have tons of student debt or whatever else. And you're probably like, there's no way I am rich, nor am I young, nor am I a ruler, because we don't use that phrase today. But here's what I want to posit to you. And here's what I realize, right? Everyone, wherever you are in the social status, on the financial spectrum, every single one of us, by virtue of living in this city, we've got enormous privilege, probably incredible earning potential. And so compared to most of the world and compared to most of the stories in Scripture, if there's someone that we can relate to, it's probably this rich, young ruler. It's kind of like, finally, there's someone that many of us can at least find ourselves within the same social story. Now, some of you are like, well, I live in Staten Island. I don't even live in Midtown. And I just come to this church because I want to be around Midtown people. Maybe that's not why you come to church, or come to this church. But nonetheless, even if that's the case, New York City, by virtue of its influence, this is probably someone that we can relate to. Now, notice when the rich young ruler, though, he comes to Jesus, and look at what happens in this story. It says, as Jesus started on his way, a man ran up to him and fell on his knees. So, sure, he's rich, he's young, he's a ruler, he's got all sorts of earning potential, he's someone who's probably influential in whatever sphere he's in, he's probably got wealth, that's why he's called a rich person, a person of great wealth. But look, this person also falls on his knees. He actually goes and he humbles himself before Jesus. He falls on his knees. In other words, he's got a humble disposition. It's not like he's some arrogant person who's kind of like, I'm rich, I'm young, I'm a ruler. No. He actually falls on his knees before Jesus. And look, he asks this question in all earnestness. He says, good teacher, he asks, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, this phrase about eternal life is a very common phrase that was used about anyone who was thirsty for kind of spiritual significance. And so here's this man then, this rich young ruler, who's wealthy, probably has great earning potential, all this. Within society, he's got everything he wants, but he's also humble, he's earnest, he's religious, he does the right thing. He probably comes on Sundays, maybe 2 out of 4 times a month. He probably gives a percentage of his money every once in a while, whenever it comes to mind. He's someone who volunteers. He's someone who probably is involved in a church community, who is somewhat kind to the people that he's around. Like this rich young ruler, if anything, is you and me, is someone who is in a place of significance. That sounds very grandiose, but nonetheless, someone who's probably does the religious thing and does it well. In fact, people probably see him as religious. People probably see him as someone who does right. And you can even see it in the text. He's someone that's actually willing to humble himself. But look what Jesus does when he talks to this rich young ruler. He says, as Jesus, or go to the next slide, please. He says, why do you call me good? Jesus answered. No one is good except God alone. You know the commandments, and here's where Jesus begins to speak to this rich young ruler. He says, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, you shall not defraud, and honor your father and your mother. So in other words, Jesus begins to list all of these different commandments. Now, the man responds, if you look in the text, the man responds after he hears all of these different kind of commands that Jesus lists. The man responds and he basically says, all these I have kept since I was a boy. In other words, there's this rich young ruler who's also very religious. He's done the right thing. People know him as religious. He's always kept all the rules. Now, one of the significant things about this passage, though, is that when Jesus lists these commandments, if you know anything about the 10 commandments, which was given to the people of Israel, these 10 commandments were often split into 2 tablets. And what Jewish scholars believe is that these 2 tablets, the reason why it was separated into 2 tablets is because on the first tablet, which is omitted from when Jesus begins to give this list of commands to this rich young ruler, he actually gives this list that omits the first 4 commandments. Now, here's the first 4 commandments. Of 1 through 10, it says, you shall have no other gods before me. That's commandment number 1. Number 2 is you shall not make for yourself any idol nor bow down to it or worship it. Number 3 is you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. And number 4, you shall remember and keep the Sabbath day holy. And then commandments 5 through 10 are basically commandments, not necessarily related. These 4 commandments are related to our relationship with God. And on the second tablet is how we're related to one another. And so when Jesus basically gives this list of commandments to the rich young ruler, it's interesting. He only gives a list of the second half of the 10 commandments. He omits the parts about our relationship with God. And so when he comes to this rich young ruler, he basically says, oh yeah, keep these commandments. And the rich young ruler gets excited. He says, these commandments I've kept since I was a boy. Yes, He's kept these commandments since he was a boy. He's a religious person. He does the right thing. He probably gives 10% to the church. He probably volunteers his time once in a while. He does his best at least once in a while. Sometimes he'll look at his Bible and he'll say a prayer every once in a while as he's going to work on the train or whatever else it might be. He is a religious person. He's a great person. Now, what's interesting, though, is that Jesus omits this part. And look at what Jesus says. Go to the next slide. Teacher, he declared. He says, all these things I've kept. Do you feel the rising excitement? It's like, all these things I've done. Even though I might have social class and earning potential, I am on the right track. I've done it. I'm a religious person. I do the church thing once in a while. I think about God every once in a while. And now look at what Jesus says to him, though. Jesus says, it says he looked at him and he loved him. And he says, one thing you lack. There's one thing you lack. Go and sell everything. Sell it and give it to the poor and come and follow me. And look at what it says. At this, the man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth. Now, on the surface, it's easy to look at this and say, this story is all about money. And sure, money is a fundamental part of this because this man is a rich, wealthy young guy. But it's actually deeper than that, especially if we look at the commandments that we're given, and especially as we think about this man himself. See, what Jesus is trying to say to this man, he's saying, you may have done all of these things. You may actually be someone who's very religious. And even the people around you declare that you're religious. And they think of you as religious. And you've kept all these commandments. In fact, you're probably like 75%, in the 75 percentile or more, or better, as being like better than everyone else. All those people that don't go to church and don't do the wrong things. You do the right thing all the time, or most of the time. But Jesus actually says, here's what I want you to do. You lack this thing. Give away everything. Everything. Now, here's what Jesus is basically saying. He's saying either Jesus is Lord of all, of everything, or he's not Lord at all. See, this faith thing, if you really, really, really want to follow Jesus, either he's Lord of everything, of all, or he's not Lord at all. In other words, what Jesus is basically saying is, I can be someone who says, God, I'm all in. In fact, I give a percentage of my money. I try to do the best I can in terms of the language that I use at work. And I try to make it out and go to church and attend church every once in a while. But yet there's this part of you that you won't give God your relationships and honor him with your body. Or some of us, we've got this public persona, and the public persona is like, yeah, I do the right thing. I'm well known as a good, righteous person. But in the secrecy of my private life, there are addictions that I carry. There's this disconnect. When Aaron Graham last week was talking about integration and how the soul, about integrating our public and our private life. Some of us, our public life looks a certain way, but our private life, we won't give that to God. Some of us, when it comes to following Jesus, we think, God, I give you my past. I give you my shame and my guilt. But there's no way I'm going to give you my future. You see, and what Jesus is basically saying, he's saying this to this man who, on the surface, I mean, most of us would look at this rich young ruler and we'd be like, this person's actually a decent guy. In fact, he's someone who I would think is actually doing the right thing. In fact, more than what's the right thing. And yet here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, you don't understand. Either Jesus is Lord of all, or he's not Lord at all. He's Lord of everything, or he's not Lord at all. Like as I've been wrestling with this in my own life, I've just kind of come to grips with even as a pastor, how hard it is for me to submit everything to God. And I'm like, this is my job, and it's hard for me to do this. In fact, there's a part of me, like, as I was reflecting on this, like, I'm someone who, I actually pride myself on not being very materialistic. Sorry, I'm going to brag about myself a little bit, which is really awkward, but nonetheless, like, I kind of pride myself on that. Like, yeah, like, I only own 3 pairs of jeans, and I cycle through them, like, every 3 days, and people are like, why are you telling me this? And, but this is kind of like, I pride myself on this. Yeah, I'm not materialistic, like, this is kind of, I don't spend money on frivolous things, and so as a result, it's easy for me to get proud about that and to look down on everyone else, including even my family and my spouse. Like, sometimes I'll say to Tina, like, look, Tina, my wife, I'll say, like, I wear the same clothes every day. Why can't, like David, our son, he's so materialistic. And she's like, he's 6. Like, what's your problem? But I realize, like, there's a part of me that gets so judgmental and, like, materialistic about, like, I pride myself on not being materialistic. And so I'm like, see how easy it is for me to submit this to God? But you know what's funny is, like, I've always kind of been that way. It's, like, not hard for me to be not materialistic. That was like a double negative / something. I don't know what happened there, but nonetheless, you get my point, right? Like, it's easy for me to not be materialistic. And so in some ways, it's easy for me to give that to God and to be judgmental towards everyone else. And yet, when it comes to me giving up my sense of control to God, I can give God my materialism. Easy. And I can judge other people who don't. But the part of me that gives up my sense of control to God, like, Tina will tell you that I make spreadsheets for everything. Like, I pour over spreadsheets more than I pray. It's because it's really, really hard for me to give up control to God. It's really easy for me to be like, God, I give you my materialism. But, oh man, God, when it comes to giving up what people think of me and my own dignity, I don't want to become a fool for you because, sure, I'm proud about being not materialistic, but I would never give up my own dignity for you because I want to look as a prim and proper pastor who's dignified and who everyone thinks is a wonderful pastor. And Tina knows that for me, sure, I can get all self-righteous about not being materialist, how I've given this to God. But am I willing to give up my own dignity? Am I willing to give up my kids' future? And some of the anxieties that I feel about their future that drive me to either be too pushy towards them. Am I willing to give up? Like, there's all sorts of things when it comes to this idea of following Jesus. Either he's Lord of everything, he's Lord of all, or he's not Lord at all. And for many of us, the question is, what are those things? Some of us, yeah, maybe you're willing to give God some Sundays here and there. Maybe you're willing to give him a little bit of your money. Maybe you're willing to give like a little bit of your time and your energy and your mental energy. But when it comes to giving your whole life and being, when it comes to giving up your whole center, when it comes to giving up your dreams, your future, your past, your shame, your addictions, it's kind of like, well, you know what? I'm a pretty good person. And much like the rich young ruler, you're probably like 75% of the way there. Like 75%. That's better. That's better than the other people of New York. Like New York City, man, if I were to compare myself to others, sure, I'm not like 100%, but I'm 75% better than my coworkers. Because you should see how egregiously bad they are. But you don't understand. You see, the standard is different. That when it comes to faith, either he's Lord of all, or he's not Lord at all. And the question is, how many of us, when it comes to our lives, will give God our finances, but we will not give God our relationships? We'll give God our relationship, but we won't give him our finances. And here what Jesus is basically saying is, hey, this is what I want you to know. This is what faith is. It's an all or nothing proposition. It's either you're all in or you're not. And that's the question that's posed to each one of us today. Are you all in or are you not? Now, there's actually, and to illustrate this, I'd like to actually invite Piero to come on up here. Give it up for Piero, everyone. Piero, great. And you're probably like, what is going on here? Thank you, Piero. Thanks for being here. Now, there's actually this exercise that I learned when I was a kid about what faith is. And it's this exercise about falling. Does anyone know this exercise here? All right, yeah, cool, right? Because this is what faith is. Faith is like, right? Faith is I entrust Piero to if I fall, that he's... You didn't have your hands out, man. That he's going to catch me. Now, here's the thing, though. You know, if you've ever been in this exercise, you know, right? Like what happens is, like, if I fall backwards, there's always this fear. And it's kind of like, I believe this much. But then there's a moment when I actually lose my gravity. When I just give up control. So it's, right, like, because before I could kind of maybe, actually I realized I should probably tell you when I'm going to go or not. Sorry. But like, right, if there's any kind of doubt, what ends up happening is I start stumbling backwards. But there's this moment when I lose control, when I lose myself completely. And I find myself, my gravity, my center, in the hands of another person. And so there's this moment then, okay, I'm going to go. Yeah. There's this moment where I lose. Well, some of you were nervous. I was kind of nervous there. Give it up for Piero, everyone. Right? There's this moment when I've lost. I've taken a step of just losing it. I've lost control, and I've released everything. My whole life is in Piero's hands, and this is what faith is like, you know. And some of us, honestly, this is kind of what we're like. We're just kind of like, when it comes to God and when it comes to faith, it doesn't matter even how long you've been coming to church or been religious, and some of us are in that boat. Where, yeah, like we've done the religious thing. This is what we do. It's because we've always done it. This is what we do. We kind of just, we give a little bit of money and we volunteer whenever we can. But the reality is we have not given up our center. We've not given up our gravity. And so as a result, we're still just kind of, and we live in that limbo, much like the rich young ruler. And here's what Jesus is basically saying. Hey, this is what I want you to know. He's either Lord of all, or he's not Lord at all. And the question for you and for me is to take this inventory. And what better time than in the new year to say, like, what area of your life and of mine have we not fully surrendered to God? Have we not fully kind of given up control and our gravity? Have we not said, God, okay, I'm going to entrust myself to you. Now, it's easy for me to say, God, I give my materialism to you. And oh my goodness, I wish my son would be more like that. I wish my wife would be more like that. But like, oh God, to give up my own dignity and to give up my dreams, to give up how other people perceive me. Like, oh God, I just want to free fall into your arms. Oh, that's such a more difficult enterprise for me, if I were to be honest. And what Jesus is basically saying is, don't you understand, like, he's either Lord of all or he's not Lord at all. This is what faith is. It's all or nothing. Are you in or are you not? And some of us, like the rich young ruler, we've just been kind of dancing and thinking we're doing the right thing. But before God, God is like, are you in or are you not? Now, if there's anyone who's ever been a single person here, which is all of us at one point or another, have you ever been in this moment where there's a relationship and with someone that you're interested in? And if I were to give 3 different kind of visual images of where we are in this relationship, there's either red light, which is basically, okay, there's no relationship going on. Only, like, I wish this girl would say yes to me if I were to ask her out. There's a red light. Then there's, like, the yellow light, Anyone ever been in a yellow light before or know someone who's been in a yellow light where it's kind of like on again, off again, and it's kind of like, I don't know if we're on or off, and I like you, but I'm kind of waiting for you to tell me first, and da-da-da, and so we're just kind of like hanging out sometimes, but it's like super unclear. Anyone been there? Yellow light? Maybe some of you are in that right now, and I don't know. But nonetheless, and then there's the red light, right? Now if anyone who's ever been in this kind of situation, or you know someone who's been in this situation. You and I know, right? Yellow lights are awful. It's just awful. Anyone ever been there? You're just kind of like, or whether your friend is in a yellow light and it's just like, this is awful. And here's what you and I know, right? Whenever someone is in a yellow light too long, it just eats away. It's like, this is way too bad or painful. Like, let's just go, right? And everyone's giving you advice. It's got to be green or red, not yellow. You can't stand this yellow light. This yellow light is really like unhealthy for you and for everyone else. Some of us, when it comes to God, it's been like this perpetual yellow. You know what's amazing though, and because some of you are kind of like, all right, you're saying like perpetual yellow, whatever, it's either everything, God is Lord of all, or he's not Lord at all. And some of you are like, we live in Manhattan, and you do that with your head. And you're kind of like, what's the ROI on having a relationship with God? What's the return on investment? I don't even know if the investment, what's the return on this thing? Some of us ask that question, and the question maybe that you're probably wondering is, why in the world should I ever lose my gravity? Because honestly, I've worked really hard to be where I am. I've got a great job. I'm fairly seen in my social circles as at least not being weird, which is the lowest threshold of what I wanted. And you're like, why in the world would I ever give up everything? It's interesting. Well, not only do we do this because if we believe that God is God, of course, God deserves everything. You see, but what distinguishes the Christian God from any other gods, what invites us and beckons us to give everything, not just kind of 75%, not just some of our, and to mollify our own kind of religious guilt or whatever else. Why in the world should we give up everything? What's so beautiful about this text? Look at what it says. It says, teacher, he declared. This is when the rich young ruler is basically like, all these I've kept. I've done the religious thing. I've done it. I've done it. And look at what the text tells us. It says, Jesus looked at him and he loved him. Before this rich young ruler could ever respond, before he could ever wonder where he stood before God, there is Jesus who looks at him and he loves him. And this same Jesus would actually live the very kind of life that this rich young ruler never could. He would live a perfect life. But he would live this life and eventually give his life away on a cross by dying on a cross to show him just how much he loves this rich young ruler. But he would resurrect from the grave, and where the rich young ruler would fail to live up to all of God's standards, only Jesus would be able to live up to God's standards, and Jesus would trade his life for this rich young ruler so that he could say to him, even when you don't measure up, my love is so for you that still, no matter how you might fail, no matter how much you might not measure up, God's love is for you, and it's demonstrated for you on the cross. And that when you entrust your life to me, to God, you can live with a kind of love and a joy and a freedom that whatever happens in your life, you're not trying to earn his approval. You're not trying to make something of yourself. You're not trying to chase all of these other things, your own dignity, so that somehow in the world's eyes, you could be seen as great and magnanimous or whatever else it might be. But instead, when you entrust your life to God, you can entrust your life to the God who has loved you from the beginning of time. The one who has loved you so that he would give his life for you. The one who has loved you, who's always been on the other side, inviting you, beckoning you to a relationship with him, so that whatever you go through, whatever feelings of kind of a loss of control, whatever feelings of losing your own dignity, whatever feelings of when you've given up everything, that feeling of free fall, you can actually fall into the arms of the God who's not demanding more of you, but a God who's willing to catch you. A God who, when it comes down to you've been in this yellow light, there's Jesus, who's been the first one to make himself vulnerable, who's been a green light always and forever, who's waiting for you, who's always here, always there, inviting you to give your life away and to find freedom when you do. He's inviting you. He's always been a green light. No matter how much you might run, no matter how much you might pursue other things in your life, there's Jesus. Always there. Always green. Looking you in the eye and loving you and welcoming you home and saying, you can give your entire life to me and you can know that I will handle you with the most delicate of arms and care and compassion and power. And I have a plan for your life if you would just give me everything. The question is, how many of us, you've been staggering around, and today the invitation is, hey, will you just go all in? Give him everything. Will you just say, God, okay, it's not only my relationship, not only the future of my kids, it's not only the future of my career, but it's also my finances. And it's also the worries, and it's also these addictions that I carry, and it's also whatever kind of profile and earning potential I have. I just want to give everything. Will you fall into the arms of the one who's always been there, who's always loved you enough that he would give his life for you and for me?